I call the Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Colleagues have said Labor actually opposed this bill at its first reading, and I think it is significant that we are now in a position to support its passage through the remaining stages in the House. And speaking to clauses 1 and 2, I think that's an important point to place on the record of the House, and it was really picking up the point that Claire Curran ended on, which was, and I refer to the commentary from the Labor minority view, where we stated that the amendments to the bill provide sufficient protection for Labor to be able to support it as a whole, acknowledging that bipartisan consensus on framework legislation of this type is desirable where broad agreement can be forged. And can I just say that that is really important. I think it's absolutely vital. If we can get cross-party consensus on framework legislation, then we end up having debates about the detail, as it were, rather than about the most fundamental aspects. And if we can get agreement across party lines on the framework, then in fact that's good for New Zealand, it's good for certainty, it's good for business, and it's good for the community as a whole. So that's why I'm very pleased that we're able to support the passage of the legislation. But I have been asked to display one more time why this couldn't come soon enough. And perhaps the Minister sitting in the chair would like to cast his eyes upon this document,
bet he wouldn't.
Because this is the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery. And it's actually pretty obvious what's going wrong with the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery when one looks at this web of particular agencies that don't all connect with each other and certainly don't all connect with the people. Now, when I was the Minister for Small Business and the Minister of Commerce, I'd undertaken a quality regulation review, and what I came out with was a very simple phrase, which was, because colleagues and ministers on the other side of the House will know this as well, we do think in silos because we're responsible for an individual silo. We're responsible, for the, Department of Labour, or you're responsible for, Foreign Affairs, or you're responsible for a different component of government. But when government actually sees itself as all these individual arms, that's not how the public sees them. So when business looks at the government, it sees the government and it says, why on earth is the government asking me for exactly the same information we provided them with last week? And that's because they don't see Inland Revenue, they don't see ACC, they don't see all these individual departments and Crown entities, all of them covered by this legislation. They don't see them, they see the government, and they ask them why they're putting them through the mill yet again. And the simple solution that I came up with, and I think it is a very simple solution, and that is why can't the many arms of government extend a single hand to business? Why can't they? And in the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, why can't the many arms of government extend a single hand to the people? And I actually personally think that in this legislation, as we've debated it, that has become crystal clear. That is exactly what we need in Christchurch. So I actually think we are on the same page. We actually do understand that the framework has to be across these silos. It has to break down all of the silos. But in Christchurch, what has become crystal clear is that it's not just with the government, departments and the Crown entities, it's also all of the organisations that they interact with as well. And in Christchurch, it's the councils that they have to have the silos broken down. So what we've got in Christchurch is we've got the council with its own silos, we've got the government with all of its silos, we've got the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority, which looks like it's the overarching organisation because its purpose is to coordinate, facilitate and direct all of the issues that relate to the recovery. Well, Sarah is in there, but it's only one of the many things. And all of these squiggly lines tend to lead to Sarah, but Sarah doesn't have any overarching authority. And that is the problem. You know, the Minister of, Mr Chairman...
The Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
The Minister of Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority doesn't, or Earthquake Recovery, doesn't know what the Minister for Building and Construction has been discussing. That's been obvious over the last few weeks, but there are so many other things. I mean, the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery didn't know that the Minister of Education hadn't consulted with the schools before announcing the massive shake-up of the schools. You know, so it's not knowing what the left hand and the right hand are doing. It's not knowing what the impact that will have on the recovery of Christchurch. That is the fundamental flaw, and all of that can be fixed if we have our focus on the framework, and the framework cannot be like this. We cannot have all of these different lines operating in this particular way. We actually have to have the whole thing as a coordinated whole and meeting the objectives of the recovery. So I think that Canterbury has served to provide a very clear example of why this legislation, the approach that this legislation is adopting, is so needed. That the cross-agency breaking down of silos is absolutely fundamental, but I think that you also have to think about the silos that exist within the government departments themselves. Because in the Canterbury earthquake, well, yeah, Moby. I mean, I've never understood why the government decided to put the Department of Labour into a brand new, huge, expanded organisation after the two reports of the Canterbury, the Pike River. No, but the Pike, yes, but the Pike River, the Pike River report would have actually said, no, hold off. Don't put the Department of Labour in there right now. It might be the right thing to do later, but don't do it now. And the second group that you would not put into Moby right now is the Department of Building and Housing. The Royal Commission report on the building collapses in Christchurch. It's just crazy to have all of these different departments come together. And I think this is the fundamental problem. The government thinks by putting the departments together that they solve the silo problem. It doesn't. Silos exist within government departments, and all that's done is made the silos less obvious, but they exist all the same. And if I use the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority, which has been set up for a single purpose, it is riddled with silos. It's got one silo for economic development. It's got one silo for the central city development. It's got one silo for social recovery. It's got another silo for the built environment and the natural environment. They have another one for cultural. So, you know, what they've done is they've managed to create a silo in a brand new department where they actually could have ensured that there were no silos to have to break down. So that's the problem that we've got in Christchurch. This legislation...
The indivisibility of the Crown.
The indivisibility of the Crown?
What happened to that doctrine?
Well, I know it's a doctrine, but I don't know how it's relevant to this.
Well, silos.
Yes, I know, but the silos... The silo.
I will.
Oh, Trevor's going to take a call to explain the doctrine of indivisibility. But the reason that... I actually think that one of the problems that we've had, and I think Ruth Dyson could also comment on this, is that when you've got reporting lines that don't allow for allowing for the money to flow with the decision making. So, for example, back in 2000 and something, we managed to get a high and complex needs formula which had funding directed to it from health, education and child, youth and family, and we got the three together. It was a massive change. We broke down the silos. How long did it take to write the rules for access to the fund? It took 2 years. 2 years to write the rules, and that's the problem. We've got to fundamentally change the culture, and the cultural change will come about if we start to think about those whole of government outcomes that are so fundamental. And Christchurch, I think, would be a classic case where we could start right away. We don't actually have to wait for the legislation to be passed to do the right thing. Canterbury is waiting for this mishmash to be resolved, and this would be the time to do it.
I call the honourable